Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please take your seats at this time as the program will begin momentarily.
The literature review, understanding and building on what has been done. So, what is a literature review and why should you do it? So, first of all, it's important in research to build on previous evidence and build on previous researchers' work. And that applies to different questions. On the one hand, what is the state of the art if you want to do a technology-oriented study? Also to understand what will you do different and what has not been done before. So what is your added value? What evidence is there that you can take into account by considerations for designing your study to have your added value? Are there gaps in the research literature? And is there probably an underlying structure you should take into account when doing your experimental variations or how to collect your data? So, typical questions, and that's at the core of your also already literature review, is to understand what is it what you want to do the literature review for? What is the purpose of your literature review? Do you want to explore the state of the art? Do you want to see different designs of applications that have been done? What are alternative approaches to the problem? There might be really different takes on the research problem you want to look at. What are the underlying models and theories which you will find in related publications? What kind of theories have been used by previous authors? What are the empirical results so far, and is there evidence you have to consider when you develop a hypothesis testing oriented study? And what kind of evidence is there? Is there qualitative data? Is there quantitative data? And so forth. So a general statement we use in a lot of our work is the Prisma statement. I can really recommend this approach, which is a four-phased model for a literature review. First, in identifying your focus, then screening different sites and databases, and screening the articles by analyzing titles, abstracts, and keywords, then defining a set of inclusion and exclusion criteria, and actually this then, by analyzing the full text articles according to your inclusion and exclusion criteria, leads to a corpus of documents that you can actually then use in your analysis and report the results and analyze in depth. So this is a typical example. This was from a search and is from a publication about mobile and inquiry-based learning. You see in the columns at the top the different databases that have been taken into account: ACM, Springer, Web of Science, Taylor Francis, Science Direct. And then you see the different results and number of publications found by the different queries which are considered the key queries. So for documenting your literature review, it's very important, like we heard before also in the desktop research already, when you do this systematically, it's even more important that you keep exact documentation of your findings and the queries you use. So in the second phase, then a screening, a typical procedure that's done in the screening is remove duplicates, because you might find different publications that are indexed in different indices from the above. In this case, 5 duplicate records were removed. And then in the eligibility phase, you look at inclusion and exclusion criteria, and you again reduce the corpus, and this leads to the result that you analyze later on. So in this study, 62 records have been used for deeper analysis. So how to work with search terms and keywords. And this is a kind of repetition, but I cannot keep repeating this enough, in the sense of use different types of combinations, play with these combinations, look at the results, look at their distribution over time, do a quick scan of what articles pop up in a certain combination of and or not combinations, work with synonyms, work with combinations of different application areas. So you really have to learn and get a feel for the domain you're working in. And to combine these in the queries, then you should really keep a record of the outcomes of these different publications and these different searches. So you have to adapt the focus of your search to get a realistic body. It will be very tough to analyze a corpus of 1,000 documents. That will take you really a long time if you have them to read them all full text. So try to find different combinations, probably reduce the number of years you're considering. So reflect on the number of publications in a query and look at the results in a fast scan. Adapt the keywords, use synonyms, record reflections and put comments to them. That's essential for remembering later on how your search process went forward. Here you see an example, what we typically do. You see a bit more complex query in the first search strategy. So you're searching for title, abstract, and keys. In that case, for higher education or university or college or undergraduate, so different educational sections. You use for terms, also you use synonyms, programming, computational thinking, computer science, or even shortcuts as CS or CT, which might occur in the title. And then third one, in this search, the author is looking for intelligent tutoring or ITS or assessment or feedback or indicators. So there are different variants, and you see it gives you about 19,000 results. So that makes clear you should focus in one or the other way to reduce this. So I think a logbook like this is really helpful later on to understand your processes and continuously work on the refinement of your searches. Another example here, then you go down depending on the number of components you use and the and combinations or the or combinations you use. So you come to a realistic result of, let's say, 160 publications probably in a different kind of focus, but that also helps you later on to understand the different areas and foci of the research field you are in. So now about the inclusion and exclusion criteria as a fourth step. So you need to define them, and it is very helpful while you screen the articles in the phase before, you already try to understand better what you're searching for. Is it, for example, only empirical studies you're searching for? Is it a certain methodology you're looking for, a certain application domain? So you can use this already to define inclusion and exclusion criteria, also to reduce and focus your corpus of documents. And this is one example. So exclusion criteria might think you only want journal publications, for example. So you include all theses, all books, all workshops, all work in progress. You want published solid research on your topic. You exclude, for example, also conceptual papers, not published, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, you can also explicitly put things in your inclusion criteria. So in this case, in the eligibility and inclusion criteria was really on, are there game elements described? But these are some things you can just decide then also in a later stage, actually in the eligibility stage. So what is very nice about this schema here, you see already that there are different inclusion and exclusion criteria you can explicitly define in the different phases of your literature study, from the identification to the final inclusion in your corpus. So, and when you then have your documents and you already tag them while understanding what your corpus develops around, it's important to develop a kind of classification system. And this can happen either bottom up, that while reading through your articles, you have your key research questions, and on these key research questions, you identify the different variations that are in your publications. So in this case, the author tries to build a classification system on the different types of collaborative virtual reality applications that are out there. And you can see, for example, in the hardware section, he identifies different types of technologies like 3D on a surface, a cave system, or head-mounted displays. So, and while reading through your articles, then you of course can extend this taxonomy if you come across a new kind of category or value for a category. But in some cases, it also makes a lot of sense before to identify the main categories that you want to use in your classification. So it's both a top-down and a bottom-up system. The more top-down you work, the more rigorous is the method, the more systematic you are in your approach. So basically then, taking this categorization system or this taxonomy, you have to classify all your documents according to these categories. Sometimes you have to work with multiple classifications, but that's a different issue. An important question is your taxonomy you develop actually would several authors agree to classifying the documents in a way you do? And for that, in a literature review, we classically use the inter-rater reliability. There are different ways to calculate inter-rater reliability. In principle, the measure gives the agreement of the classification of authors on a certain part of or one document in your corpus. So would all authors agree on classifying the given document in that way according to your taxonomy? I think it's a valuable measure if you want to make higher level conclusions about your taxonomy, and that can be important for your publication and for your results. So for the data analysis, you then later, and in explanation of your results, you have to explain the categories, best give examples for specific values and categories, consider the distribution over your categories. So it can be that you find that a certain, coming back to our example, that a certain type of hardware is preferably used and there are big gaps with the other ones. Identify patterns probably of combinations of different parts of your taxonomy. So do the HMD, the head-mounted displays examples always include a specific design pattern in the software, for example? Yeah. Other results you can look at is, are there gaps in the distribution? Is something that you would think of not done in the literature before? And cross-links between the values and categories. So for the reporting, I think you should use something like Prisma or Comparable to have a schema in steps where you clearly document how you start your search, in which databases you searched, how you reduced your corpus, how you analyzed your corpus. You should, of course, use citation standards to collect all your publications. I highly recommend a reference management system. It can be something like EndNote, Mendeley, Reference Manager. There are Zotero, there are varieties of them, but use something like that to collect your references. This makes it much easier when writing up your reporting. You should rigorously report on the method and the analysis. You basically, in the results section, you focus on the different research questions and your concluding taxonomy you found, but also on the cross relations and the higher level conclusions. So I think it's very, very important that you really go back also to your purpose and to your research questions when reporting the results. And look at higher level results and conclusions you can find. You will find a set of examples on the website. And just to sum up, so focus on your research question, identify databases, key terms, work with queries, vary the queries. In the screening, you can have different inclusion and exclusion criteria than later on. In the eligibility, these are, you need to have them well formulated. Classify, use categories and values, and when you do the reporting, start with the simple one-dimensional results and then go to higher level results and reporting.